So let's go ahead and finish up our analysis of actual versus standard. So we're going to focus on this tab, and we completed the last part of the direct materials for plastic. So now let's look at metal. So the actuals in metal was that the company was able to reduce waste again. That's part of their efficiencies by 30 pounds. And that was good because, again, we experienced another increase. For metal, it's $1.10 a pound, which also impacted freight and receiving and handling. So again, I am going to come over here, and in my pounds per unit, my 450 did not change. So we're going to keep that the same. But remember, we were able to reduce the allowance for waste by 30 pounds. So now that means instead of using 500 pounds of metal, I'm only using 470. So that one's done. Now let's update our prices. So $1.10 and 20 cents. So now over here, my price from 40 cents unfortunately went up $1.10, and my 5 cents in handling also went up 20 cents. Now remember, again, the cool thing is I can do this little formula since it's exactly the same. So I've now accounted for my change in metal parts. And if I look over here, I now can sync up my 470 and my new cost per pound of $2. And so what we see here is that now the metal per unit is 940 compared to 250. That's a huge increase. What is that made up of? Well, let's come over here. That huge increase in total led to an unfavorable total variance in materials of 690, and $1.50 of that was contributed to an unfavorable change in the price, again, which means the price went up, but a favorable change in my usage. And so those two offset each other in that total. And it's very possible that we have a favorable and an unfavorable individual change that contributes to an overall change that is either favorable or unfavorable. All right. So now let's go ahead and wrap the rest of these up. So paint, we were able to reduce paint and stickers waste by 3 pounds. So let's get that put in there. So the required materials are 5, and the allowance for waste was 5, but we reduced that by 3 pounds. And then over here in my price, let's look and see what happened. No changes for price. That's good. So no changes for price. These are going to equal the same. So again, here, I didn't make a formula except for I'm just referencing another cell and drag that down as well. So up here, my pounds per unit for paint and stickers is 7. My cost per pound did not change. And so what's interesting about this one is notice that the cost per unit went from $50 down to 35, which is good because now we have a favorable variance. Now this one's unique because we didn't have a favorable or unfavorable change in our cost per pound, but we did have a favorable change in our pounds per unit. Remember, it took less paint and stickers. And so overall, that entire difference between standard and actual, standard budget and actual, we were able to see that that's entirely made up of right here, the $3 per pound, or I'm sorry, the 3 pounds per unit that we saved. There was no impact from price. Now, the last two are labor and overhead. So let's look at these last two. So employees were tasked with increasing equipment assembly and decreasing hours. Okay, so that doesn't really tell us anything. They were successful, brought down hours by $5 a unit, which is great. And then the company gave them a $6 an hour raise. And that also led to an increase in payroll taxes of $2 per hour. So let me look here. My actual production, what did we bring it down by? 5 hours. So I went from 20 hours, bring it down by 5, that gets me to 15. Now, my time for breaks and setup and cleanup did not change. So I'm going to keep those in there. And then we said they gave them a $6 an hour raise. So I'm starting with 15. Now they're up to $21 an hour. So got that accounted for. And then also, oh yes, the $2 increase in payroll taxes. So let's get that put in there. So what else is made up in our rate? This is kind of nice to see. So there's cost of living adjustments. Those are the same. We've got our payroll taxes. That's what went up $2. And then our other benefits stayed the same. So now we're looking at a $28 difference compared to 20. And where does that come from? Remember, if we look in these formulas, that came from the $6 hourly rate increase, which is up here, and our $2 hourly payroll increase, which is there. So again, now we can come up here and I can populate my direct labor hours and my price per unit. And so now we've gone from 500 to 560. Now it's good that we saved in some hours because we had a significant pay raise, right? So if I come over here and look, overall, I have an unfavorable variance of 60, which was due to my unfavorable change in my actual versus budget for my payroll, but a favorable change in my pounds. All right, last one here. So manufacturing overhead. Since we decreased labor hours, manufacturing overhead came down. So now instead of overhead being allocated at 4 times direct labor hours, it's only 2. But we did have an increase for plant utilities and cleanup. So the way this one is set up over here, and for some silly reason, where is that at? Here it is. Okay, so 100. If you notice how we're multiplying this, okay, it's 25 times 4. Remember, 4 was the direct labor hours that we were times last time. Here, I already updated that for you. So this needs to be a 2 versus a 4. Or what we could do again is take our 4 minus 2, because what did we say? It's not being allocated at 4 times direct labor hours now, it's only 2 times. So there's my 2 times. Notice that brings that down to 40 per unit instead of 100 hours. So that's going to make a huge difference, okay? Now, remember, though, we had a couple of price changes. So that one's updated. And how about this? However, there was a slight increase, $12 an hour for plant utilities and cleanup. So plant utilities, notice we did not change the insurance, but we did change the plant utilities by $2. And we changed the cleanup by $2. And so now instead of being at 8, we're at 11. So let's come up here and we're going to put in our 40 and we're going to put in our rate. So, oh, sorry, I'm not sure what happened there. Grab the right column or the right number. There we go. Okay. So notice what's happening here is we went from $800 a unit down to $440. So ask yourself real quick before we scroll over, is that favorable or unfavorable? Pause the video if you need to, but that is favorable. So overall, we have a positive number here because, again, that is a favorable change offset by this huge savings in how many hours we needed per unit, offset by a slight increase of $3 overall in our cost per pound. And overall, we're looking at a favorable variance. Now, something I wanted to point out to you guys. Number one, notice the schedule is adding up these. This really makes no sense to us. We need to get that out of there because it's not a cost per pound. We've got some hours mixed in there, okay? So that's really not helpful to us. But what is helpful is when we compare, remember when we did this budget down here at the bottom? Okay, just to remind us, down here at the bottom of our master budget, our total cost was $2,400 per unit. We incorporated all these changes, and now look what that is. It's gone up to $3,115. And we just walked through all the changes that caused that. Overall, that's an unfavorable variance of $715 because our price per unit or our cost per unit went up by $715 in total. We would have to use all this information to really truly explain the variances. Imagine you're working and your boss wanted to know this information. You need to know all of that. It's not just one thing that causes that change. So With that, I want you to focus in on making sure that you're understanding and thinking through those variances, how they're calculated. I put a document that has kind of all the variances laid out for you that you can use as you're working through the homework, since you don't necessarily need to use Excel, but visually I wanted you to see what was happening here. So with that, we're going to have one last video that's going to walk us through this actual income statement, and then we'll call it a wrap.